You're watching Compliance That Works with Shannon Robertson exclusively on CBT News.
Hi everyone, and welcome to today's episode of Compliance That Works. Successful dealership program, processes, and people exclusively on CBT News. I'm Shannon Robertson with AFIP, and this show is dedicated to helping dealerships remain in compliance to protect their operations and their profits. On today's episode, we have Kyle Sipples, Compliance Officer with the Auto Saver Group. How you doing today?
Good morning. Nice to be here.
Good. Thank you for joining us. Just take 30 seconds and let's give a quick intro on yourself, if you don't mind.
Sure. My name is Kyle Sipples. I work for the Auto Saver Group. We're a group of 13 domestic and import dealerships in Vermont and New Hampshire. And before joining the Auto Saver Group, I was an attorney in the private practice of law and also worked for government for several years.
Thank you. How long have you been with Auto Saver?
A little over 9 years.
Okay. A little bit of a transition from one side to the other, it seems
Little
like.
bit.
Excellent. The main reason why I wanted you to join today is you have a very unique focus on compliance at your store. Obviously, as a compliance officer, there's a lot of things that you oversee, but you have a great focus on what I would call complaints, either at a consumer, federal, or state level. Walk me through kind of why that is a huge area of focus for you.
Sure. Let me explain the philosophy behind it a little bit.
Absolutely.
As a former lawyer in private practice, working for government, one thing I realized is that I was dealing with all sorts of problems that when I would look at my file, I'd say, you know what, why wasn't this resolved earlier? Why did this become the big problem it is? And so I have a real belief that by the time something winds up in front of a regulator, by the time something winds up in a lawsuit, there were many opportunities to address that problem that would have created so many fewer headaches for the dealer than being in denial about the problem and then letting it drag out.
Absolutely. Well, and the quote that I've read and tweaked is that over 50% of audits performed at a dealership by a federal or state regulatory agency are driven by consumer complaints. And I reword that to unresolved consumer complaints.
Absolutely. And what they're looking for are patterns. So if you're not resolving your complaints at the dealership level, and more people are reaching out to whichever regulator they may reach out to, the more phone calls they get, the more they think, okay, there's a pattern here, which means there's an institutional problem here.
Oh, absolutely. And most consumers, would you say that most consumers don't even know they can go to a government agency to complain?
I would say maybe in the past, but
Okay.
now with the internet, I think more and more realize that's an option.
I agree. And I always tell dealers, I think what drives them to that internet search is the fact that you haven't responded.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yep,
There was an
absolutely.
interesting statistics where it talked about the percentage of people that were unhappy will go back to the organization where they had the bad experience to try to seek a resolution before they go somewhere else.
Right, and just from a marketing perspective, an unhappy customer tells on average something like 9 people. A happy customer tells point something.
There you go. Yeah, a very known statistic on why you want happy customers. In terms of complaints, what are all the avenues that you use to look for on complaints, right? There's a lot of different ways a customer complain, right? What are all the avenues you look for, and that seems like an overwhelming kind of job to keep track of everything. Walk me through kind of what you look for and how you oversee that.
Yeah, sure. Now with the internet, you really need to have your eyes open in many places, whether it's Google reviews, Facebook reviews. We also want to know if someone calls the dealership, if they email the dealership. Sometimes they even find out the owner of the group's email address. They'll email the owner. So you just need to make sure that there's a procedure where these can be reported to whoever is tasked with handling those complaints.
Do you have because I think you make a great point. A lot of people call the front desk unhappy, and that call gets transferred to the person they had the bad experience with.
Correct.
Right? Probably the least effective way to handle a complaint is transferring back to where it started. Because complaints come from a lot of different avenues, you're relying on the dealership staff to forward complaints to you. And complaint to somebody answering the phones might have 2 different meetings. So how did you handle the training, communication? How did you set up the process so they know what to send you and how to send you?
Sure. So the first thing you need to do is really set out the expectations as far as what complaints are going to be forwarded to, in our group, me, and what can stay at the store level. So certain things may be overlooked. A customer doesn't get floor mats they were promised, not a big deal. So we really train the dealerships on, okay, these are the type of complaints that now I need to be brought in on. And different groups may draw that line in different places, but we have found what works for us.
Are there keywords that you train them on? I know that, places where I've been, there are keywords. If a customer says this, it automatically goes to the point of, to the contact person.
Yeah, sure. And anything that's legal or that a regulator may be interested in, those aren't negotiable. Those need to come to me.
And then let's talk about who handles complaints, right? Because, there needs to be training involved. Communication with the customer could be discoverable, right? We want to be careful what we send out.
Right.
Do you handle the complaint point to finish? Do you delegate? Is a mixture of both? How do you determine who gets to interact with customers for resolution?
Yeah, well, the core principle is that if it's a substantive complaint, the person who is intimately involved in that transaction is the worst person to be handling that complaint. And it's human nature. They're going to be defensive. Maybe they did nothing wrong at the end of the day, but they're biased. When I used to do jury work, you look for unbiased people to make decisions on these problems. Yeah. We want someone who's unbiased, a fresh set of eyes who can take a look at it and isn't invested in what happened originally. And so that's why those need to come to me.
Okay. And then are you start to finish from that point?
In our group, yes. Obviously different groups of different sizes, that may be different, but that works for our group.
How do you monitor, document, track those complaints, right? Because you need to document it, in my opinion. So how do you monitor, document, and track those? And in terms of customer communication, you want to make sure that all of that is something that you can show you've done your due diligence. Kind of what's your process for completing all of that?
Right. So I have a log I keep of the complaints, and I track them and see where they are in the process. But the very first thing I do, and I think most dealerships don't understand how important this is, I reach out to the customer right away. First of all, they want to know they've been heard. Correct. So many problems happen when people think, I just wasn't listened to. So they want to be heard. So I reach out to them and say, we've heard your complaint. I also tell them, and this is true, that our group's focus is on happy customers. And we want satisfied customers. And I view my job as there's a dispute between the customer and the dealership. What can I do to make that customer satisfied? Now, one very important thing I say to them at that stage is I will do whatever I can to come up with a reasonable resolution that works for everyone involved here. The key word is reasonable. There are bound to be customers that their expectations are not reasonable. They didn't get the floor mats at the time they bought the car. Now they think they should wind up with a free car. So, but that's really helpful later when you're trying to make that customer satisfied. You can say, remember when I said I would do anything for you that is reasonable for me to do to make you happy? Can you explain to me how I can go to the dealership and say your request is reasonable? And you're working with them, but it really gets them to start thinking like, okay, I need to come up with a solution here for myself that is reasonable. And that way we resolve so many more situations.
That makes sense. It almost seems like you do a good job, and maybe you can speak to this, on how you work with the customer so they see you as an advocate for them.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean it when I say we want satisfied customers. That our group feels very strongly about that. And I want to get back to, they're going to tell someone, you know what, I thought this was an issue, but they treated me very fairly, and it turns out I'm really satisfied here.
You find there's an increase in customer loyalty when you work with the customer, find a reasonable solution?
Yeah, for sure. Most of our dealerships are in rural locations. We can't afford to alienate people where we are. It's a small communities. People talk, reputations matter. So it is important to have that customer be satisfied at the end of the day. Understanding maybe not everyone can be, right, but I'm going to make sure, if there was a chance, that we will make that customer satisfied. Also, you have to remember, if the customer is satisfied at this level, that's it. They're happy. They're not picking up the phone and calling a lawyer, calling a regulator. So it's a win-win.
Well, and they're also not on social media. I think sometimes I wish we didn't have the impact it does sometimes, but one negative review on a social media platform drives a lot of attention. I've seen examples where one complaint's been shared, a large number of times when simply nobody's trying to respond, right? Customers reached out, made a complaint, nobody's trying to help. That complaints get posted, it gets shared, other people start to jump on that. So from a social media standpoint, A, how aggressive are you with social media? And B, do you interact with social media, or do you try to get them offline to have those further discussions?
I try to get them offline for sure. I want discussions to be private. The internet doesn't forget. Once it's out there on the internet, it's out there, and that's that. So we would much rather deal with them on a one-to-one level and not have it be through going back and forth with reviews and comments to their review and that sort of thing. And I will tell you, one of the things we're not afraid to ask is, hey, if we make you satisfied here, will you consider removing whatever criticism you left online? And almost always they're happy to do it because they are indeed satisfied.
Wow. That's I don't know if a lot of dealers ask that question. That's a great question to ask. Let me ask on the social media, from a social media response, would you suggest that dealers kind of have a candid response statement they make to social media, acknowledging, I understand you weren't happy, here's our contact, we'll reach out to you? Would you suggest that dealers kind of have a standard response so those complaints show that there was an acknowledgement and an effort to try to get a hold of that customer?
Yeah, I think you really need either a team or a particular person that handles responses on social media.
Okay.
Because you only have one chance to get that response right. And one of the things I don't feel works well is a canned response, because someone can see 50 reviews and see, wait a minute, that response was the same every time someone had a complaint. So it seems impersonal, it seems that you don't care, it seems like you just hit a button. So you need someone who is trained on how to respond. And really, you're not just responding to that particular customer, you're responding to all your customers who may see that review. So you need those potential customers to see that you listened and that you cared and you want this customer to be satisfied.
Who do you believe should do that training? Because that training is very unique, right? Is that a compliance officer training an employee? Do you believe that's legal counsel providing that training? Where do you think that training should come from?
I think it needs to be a team approach because, as you hit upon, there are all sorts of issues that impact a response. There's not only is there the legal, but there's marketing too. As I said, I view it as marketing to future customers who are going to see these reviews. So I think you need to get a team of people in place and say, okay, what do you want to see or not see in responses? But get a variety of people from a variety of different operations within the dealership.
That makes sense. It's funny what you said earlier. I didn't even think about it, but I was going on vacation with the wife last year, and we were looking at reviews of some resorts, and there was a couple of them that had some negative reviews, and it was the same response over and over again. Nothing personalized, no acknowledgement, and I didn't even look at booking simply because I felt like they're not even listening to what the customer's saying online. They're just giving that standard response over and over again. So I think that's an excellent point that you made on, right, you need to have a good, well-formed response, but be careful from the copy and paste responses.
Right, yeah. I mean, you didn't listen to the customer if all you did was hit F10. Yeah.
That's funny. Let's talk about the end result. How do you know there's resolution? I think an important part of resolving a complaint is having acknowledgement for the customer there is resolution. So what do you see as resolution? Is it just a response? How do you gauge or how do you measure customer resolution?
Yeah, I see resolution as a satisfied customer if there was something I could reasonably do to make them satisfied. And the way I measure resolution is I will ask them, does this satisfy you? Will this satisfy you? Are you happy with this result? And if the answer is yes, great. If the answer is no, then let's talk about it. How can we get to that end result? But you need to hear it from them. Don't assume just because they said yes to something that they're satisfied with that resolution.
Which is an important part of this conversation. I'm glad you brought that up. A lot of people respond. I've given the response. I've told them, what happens at this point is up to them. That's not resolution.
And you also need to follow up. So let's say you come up with a resolution and the resolution says, we'll get your car back in and we'll do X, Y, and Z to your car. Many people would think, okay, great, job done. Now they're happy. Follow up with it. Make sure it happened. Make sure the work got done. And they are pleased as punch a couple weeks later if you call them to say, hey, I'm just checking in. I want to make sure everything was done to your satisfaction, and I want to make sure you're satisfied here.
It shows I think it reinforces your opening statement that if you do follow up, then it is true. You do want happy customers, and I think it shows in those actions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you, from a complaint standpoint, is your communication email only, phone call? Do you always end with the resolution email? Like, what is your documentation? Because sometimes those complaints get challenged from the state.
Yep.
So you want documentation, but not every customer wants the email back and forth.
Yeah, I try as hard as possible to do email, and I've had good results with that. You talk about a regulator. I am not afraid of a regulator seeing that I did everything possible for this customer and to make this customer satisfied. Now, first of all, your first communication with a regulator should not be when they're calling you about a complaint. I am a huge fan of being proactive and calling up a regulator and saying, hey, I'm so-and-so, I work for such and such a group. I just wanted to introduce myself. I have said to regulators that, the owner of my group pays me very well to make sure that we do things correctly, that our customers were satisfied, and I want you to know that our group believes in that mission. And let me tell you, that goes a long way. And now if you have some sort of relationship, if there's a little something, they know who to reach out to. And having worked for government, what I know is, first of all, they want to get a file off their desk. And if you can make it easier for them to do that, they're going to be happy people. But second of all, they're looking for trends. So if they can reach out to you from very early on and know you're going to take it seriously and know that you care about compliance and making sure things were done correctly and making sure the customers were satisfied, first of all, probably the person they work for, especially if it's an attorney general's office, they want to get reelected. So they want happy people. So if they know they can call you and they can make someone happy, and they're not going to be saying to the attorney general, how come you didn't do anything for me? You're going to make that regulator, a very happy person. So you want to build that relationship. So not only will they call you, maybe if there's something early on that you can just deal with, but they're not waiting for the 15th file, the 20th file. And I always say enforcement actions happen because they're patterns.
There you go.
And because those files were building up on their desk. So it's important to have that relationship so they know you take it seriously. You're not the group that they need an enforcement action on. And they understand in a group that hires hundreds of people, people can make mistakes. The best dealerships with the best policies, the best commitment to compliance, regulators understand that every now and then humans can make mistakes. And so they're really looking at your culture more so than an individual person, I find.
One of the things I like to say when I train is there is no perfect dealer, right? They're just not. However, what image do you portray? What's your culture? And how do you make sure customers are satisfied? And we're in a relationship business. And the answer you gave was going to be my next question. We are in a relationship business, relationship with our customers, relationship with our employees, and relationship with the government officials. Having those relationships and letting the state government know, or the federal government, here's who I am, here's my job, we want satisfied customers. If you need anything, reach out and ask. And I repeatedly, from those that do that, I am consistently hearing positive feedback on how well they work together to provide resolution for customers. So it's in those situations, and I think what you're saying, they're no longer focused on the dealer, they're focused on what are we doing to resolve the customer complaint?
Absolutely.
Because they know that's your job role. And I think the focus, when they call you, the focus is about the customer, not the dealership, because there's not a pattern. There's not a lot of negative statements, and everybody stays focused on that customer, which keeps the dealer off the radar. And I think that's what I hear you saying is it about the relationship? It's about the customer.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Let's talk about training. You manage complaints, you track complaints. There are learning opportunities. right? How do you handle those learning opportunities? How do you hold them accountable? And at what point does it become, okay, this is no longer a learning, this is an applying. This is no longer about knowledge. This is about an inability to apply.
Right. I think you really have to look at intent. As I said earlier, honest people can make mistakes.
Yep.
So what we look for are patterns, and we also try to drill down to say, okay, what was going through, let's say it's an F&I manager, what was going through their head when this happened? By doing that, I'm really trying to figure out what their intent was. Was it an honest mistake, or do we have a bigger problem we need to address here?
Training issue. How do you document? Let's say you determine it's a training issue. Do you have them go through assigned training? Do you provide the training? Is this a compliance thing? Is this a compliance item you document, show you gave the training? Do you go to that level of documentation with the employees to show due diligence?
Yeah, so I'll keep a record in any complaint of, okay, this is how it was resolved. And if part of that is training the employee that was involved in the complaint, that's going to be part of that documentation for the resolution of that complaint.
Excellent. Accountability. 2 or 3 times you got a complaint on me. What does accountability look like? Is it our finance or sales managers, are they financially responsible for those errors? How do you handle accountability to help correct behavior?
Yeah, so I mean, we have various state laws that impact whether or not they can be charged back, and so I don't want to get what may work for our group.
No, I get it.
May not work somewhere else, but I think the important thing is accountability can look like many different things depending on the situation. The key for me is that the employees in the dealership see that there is accountability. And maybe it's just something put in a person's personnel file, maybe it's something up to termination. It really is factually driven. So I don't have a chart I can look at and say column A, row 1, this is the result. I'm gonna look at every situation on its own, and then as a team, our management team will come up with whatever that resolution is for that particular employee. But we want that ability to sort of tailor the resolution to the particular facts of the situation. Absolutely. We want that flexibility. But the key is that, as I said, the dealership itself sees and knows that there is accountability. If you want to prevent problems from happening in the future, you have to have the employees see that this is our belief, this is our commitment, and we take these things seriously.
So let's talk about the employee adoption, because I think that there's an interesting view of what's the perception of compliance with dealership employees, right? Sometimes we're seen as partners, sometimes we're seen as, oh, here goes the compliance guy.
Right.
Do you find that now that your dealership and the employees know there's a dedicated point of contact, working complaints, trying to help customers, do you find that you've become a little bit of a resource for them as well when situations arise that they don't want to turn into a complaint? Here's what's happening. I don't want it to be a complaint. What do you suggest? Do you find that there's more interaction?
Yeah, I mean, I get calls all the time, and you want those calls sooner than later. And I'm not saying I get calls because there are problems. Right. I'm saying there are calls because they don't want there to be problems and they want to do things the right way.
Absolutely.
Now, remember earlier I said when I reach out to a customer, I say, I will do whatever is reasonable to make you a satisfied customer. I'm also going to be very reasonable when it comes to the employee, because there are times when a customer is not reasonable and the employee did absolutely nothing wrong. And there are many of those times. So I also want the employees to know that I am not someone they should be scared of when I call them. I am someone who's a resource for them, and I will go to bat for them. If they did everything correctly, I'll be the first to go to bat for them. And I will tell the customer, I reviewed this, and I understand you may be frustrated here, but I don't see where anything was done incorrectly here. And I can sort of turn the conversation to get it off the complaint about a particular person to, oftentimes it's buyer's remorse or something like that. And, again, to sort of turn the conversation around, I understand you're not happy here, but let's talk a little bit about why you're not happy. And maybe if it is buyer's remorse, oftentimes I say, you're free to come back to the dealership and maybe we can work something out for you that works for both parties here. So It's funny, all too often people are quick to say, oh, it's just buyer's remorse. We didn't do anything wrong, which is all true. We didn't do anything wrong, it's just buyer's remorse. Okay, that doesn't mean we should just send them on their way. Every time I've had something involving buyer's remorse, I actually hook that customer up with the dealership again. Maybe there's a different vehicle that works better for them or not, and maybe we can't resolve it, but at least, again, we tried to make that customer happy.
I think there's an important part to what you're saying through our training. As we work with finance and sales managers, there's a lot of conversation. They'll ask, as we teach rules and regulations, this happened, do we have to fix this? And we have a lot of conversation where legally you don't have to fix it.
Right.
But at the end of the result, do you have a satisfied customer?
Right.
And I think that's a dealership culture mindset. It's a top-down approach that it's not always about legally should or shouldn't we. What's the right thing to do for the customer? And it sounds like that's kind of the mindset that the employees have as well when working with you on these.
Right, and if it's a matter of putting the customer in a different vehicle, and maybe you're going to gross $500 less when you put them in that different vehicle, that $500 is worth the marketing cost in and of itself.
You've been doing this for a while. You have the complaints you're measuring. What are the impacts you've seen from a dealership standpoint? Measurable, immeasurable? I guess, how do you measure success on things like this?
I measure success in the number of times my phone rings, and it rings a whole lot less than 9 years ago. I can tell you that. And I don't mean that to sound negative. I mean, the automobile business has evolved, and I think as my group grow, they had the luxury of bringing someone like me on board. And your one roof operation, two roof operation, they don't have the luxury, as I said, of having someone like me and maybe having all these policies in place and that sort of thing. But what makes my job easy is the owner of my group wants to do things right, and he wants satisfied customers. That's what I want. So we're a good team in that regard. And what I find is we have fewer complaints overall because dealership staff is invested in doing things correctly. And if there is a complaint, I am not terribly afraid of dealing with the complaint because I know probably things were done right. And if they weren't done right, it's an aberration. That I know that the authorities know that we're committed to doing things right, and they are not skeptical of that commitment.
Kyle, all great stuff. I like this topic. I'm glad you came on to join us. In my experience, complaints is a topic that not all dealers handle straight on, want to track it, want to show each of the steps along the way. And I'm glad you came on to share the successes of what you found with hitting it head on and that top-down approach of doing what's right for the customer and the benefits of that. I really appreciate that. Before we close, I'd love to hear a little bit of your story of how you got into the auto industry.
Yeah, so as a lawyer, I was in private practice and I was a litigator, so I was dealing with all sorts of situations where things had gone very badly. And I would look at each of those and say, there were about 10 stages here where it didn't have to get to this point. I'm also a firm believer that litigation is a horrible system to resolve problems. It really is. It's a system based on 200, 300, 400-year-old rules trying to fix modern day problems, and it doesn't work well. It's expensive, and nobody's happy with the result at the end of the day, typically. So I said, you know what, from a career perspective, I wanted to try to prevent problems than deal with problems that could have been prevented.
I appreciate you sharing. I always love how people get in the automotive industry, and we're glad you're here to help prevent and protect not just the dealers, but most importantly, protect our customers as well.
Yeah, and the one thing I would say is it's a phenomenal industry. My problem is now that I went from being a general litigator doing a variety of industries to exclusively doing automobile work, I don't want to go anywhere else. I love the business.
It is I love the industry. We're all in the industry. We're all here for a reason, and we stay here for a reason. Thank you again, Kyle. I hope today's interview was insightful for you, and we'll see you on the next episode of Compliance That Works, exclusively on CBT News.
Thanks for watching Compliance That Works with Shannon Robertson.